But first, let's start by going to Israel Palestine, where unity government talks have faltered after Netanyahu's main rival, General Gantz, has rejected a meeting. Benny Gantz. I'll quote briefly from Reuters. Talks to form a national unity government in Israel hit a further snag on Tuesday after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's centrist election rival called off a meeting with the embattled leader. And I have some big questions about whether, defining Benny Gantz, a general responsible for very extensive and systemic war crimes in Gaza, a centrist, is both a media failure on Reuters' part and, in fact, an unwitting damning indictment of the ongoing occupation and the politics of Israel and Palestine. As these talks falter, it's important to get an understanding of the consensus inside Israel, which sees as a matter of ongoing reality and normalcy that Israel is going to govern 5 million people that have no democratic rights. They don't have freedom of movement. They don't vote in elections. They are, in fact, run in literally operationally and in terms of reality systems that would look to be analogous to the Jim Crow South. There's separate roads in the occupied territories for Palestinians and Israelis. There's a broad, extensive apartheid structure. And that is not going to be challenged by the blue and white alliance of Benny Gantz. The center-right that Benny Gantz represents is challenging Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud because Benjamin Netanyahu has extensive and serious accusations of personal corruption around him, and not only personal corruption in a venile sense, which many Israeli leaders have both been charged with and actually served jail time in the case of Ehud Olmert, but in Netanyahu's case, actual corruption that has a bearing on the free press and democratic function of Israel within 67 borders. And that is an escalation in the overall authoritarian turn of Israel, even outside of the over 40-year occupation of Palestine and, of course, the 47 making of the Israeli state, which, of course, there is a profound historical justification and understanding of why people would want that, but also was literally predicated on cleansing Palestinians out of their homes. This is historical reality and undeniable. That's one part of what's happening. The other part is that there are multiple factions at play here, and just as in any other part of the world, it's helpful to have a real broader guide post for understanding all of the various people and factions and interests that you're talking about. So we've talked about Likud, and I will just touch a little bit more on Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Alliance. Benny Gantz is a former IDF general. In 2014, he led the assault against Gaza, which the UN says at least 2,104 Palestinians died, including 1,462 civilians, 495 were children, 253 were women. Now, the prime argument of the Blue and White list is to, as I said, a Blue and White Alliance is to retrieve some sense of normalcy in Israel, and because of the personal, just utterly out of control, nation brand damaging conduct, behavior, and way of Netanyahu. And the Joint List, which I'm going to get to in a minute, the Joint List is a very important party in Israel. They're the third highest vote getter, and they are a coalition of socialists and those who represent Arab civil rights. This is significant, and you should go and look up. I did a standalone primer on the Joint List and democracy in the Middle East, which is available on this same YouTube channel in one of the Monday streams. The Joint List is the only vehicle for pure democracy in Israel and Palestine that's electoral. They got 13 votes, and they were willing to support Gantz getting into government because of a desire to get rid of Netanyahu, and Gantz has been standoffish, to say the least. There's also been problems inside the Joint List, with some objecting to going into coalition with Gantz because of his war crimes in Gaza. But let's talk a bit more about the Joint List. They're made up of four Palestinian parties: Balad, Hadash, Talal, and the United Arab List. Of these four, the socialist Hadash won the majority of seats for the ticket. And this is where the leader, Ayman Odeh, comes from. If there is a unity government between Likud and Blue and White, the Joint List would be the largest party in opposition, meaning that the leader of Hadash in the Joint List, Ayman Odeh, would receive military briefings, and the Joint List would have representatives in important committees that make decisions regarding Palestine. This could be hugely significant. There's likely going to be an attempt to thwart it as the reality of Israeli racism and anti-democracy gets further and further articulated. On the right, there's Israel Palestine, which is a far-right pro-settler group run by Avigdor Lieberman, who is a secular fascist and extremely opposed to Shas, which is an ultra-Orthodox party. There's two ultra-Orthodox parties, actually. Shas tends to be obviously extremely socially conservative, but support more generous social benefits. The other ultra-Orthodox party is in fact highly market-oriented and is more like the far right in the United States in that sense. Meretz is a traditionally outspoken critic of the treatment of Palestinians and really the only party left of sort of social democracy in Israel. It joined the Democratic Union, where it appears they have turned their back on both their principles and they've and also was strategically ineffective. This was the alliance formed by the former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's mostly been known in recent months for his associations with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the Labor Party still exists. They just barely managed to survive. And under Amir Peretz, who is a Moroccan labor union organizer, who's also implicated as defense secretary in the Olmert government in war crimes in Lebanon, but does have a genuine anti-austerity labor politics. He tried to basically make labor not talk about the peace process and external relations, or Palestinians in general, but focus back on retrieving Israeli social democracy. And labor, which has been utterly decimated, was in fact able to at least survive in parliament with that approach. Now, inside Palestine, you have three kind of broad factions. There's the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who announced elections will be held in the near future. There haven't been elections since 2006, in large part because Fatah and Hamas have struggled to come to an agreement on a variety of issues. Fatah controls the West Bank. They are profoundly moderate. They're security subcontractors of Israel. If you are a believer in the two-state solution and the peace process, which is a dead, discredited process, this is the only faction you can have any trust and belief in. They actually will go to the mat for this. You also have a BDS movement, which arises out of civil society efforts in Palestine. They're exhausted by other forms of struggle. The BDS movement hopes to draw attention to the plight of Palestinians while breaking the economic incentives that support the settlement system. The movements and its co-founders are regularly threatened and harassed, and recently have been denied entry to the United States. Then, of course, you have Hamas running Gaza. Hamas is a right-wing organization connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. It has fused religious conservatism, social welfare programs, and engaged extensively before elections when it came to power in the Bush administration in terrorism. There's no doubt about it. And we need to be able to condemn, blowing up a pizza parlor and targeting civilians. You need to be able to condemn that, period. You can't condemn violence, period, of a liberation struggle. That would be profoundly presumptuous and arrogance. But something that specifically targets civilians in that manner, we have to have some basic standards here. Hamas in government is trying to govern and trying to survive. And whatever we think of them, and of course we oppose them in many respects because of our politics, the reality is that there is a pure asymmetry in this situation. Israel controls both Palestinian territories, has a totalized control over the system, and has in fact inflicted significant damage and many crimes and many killings on Gaza. And the justification of Hamas is simply absurd given the profound asymmetry of the situation. In the 2018, the nation-state law was passed, which codified second-class citizenship for Arabs inside 67 borders, declaring Israel the natural home of the Jewish people and the right to exercise national determination in the state of Israel as quote-unquote unique to the Jewish people. Netanyahu has also signed a pledge to annex the Jordan Valley as the reality of what that political system gets clearer and clearer every day. Despite Netanyahu's corruption scandals and personal failures, he's been successful at pulling the country even farther to the right. The difference between Gantz and Netanyahu is the difference between degree of suffering the Palestinians will face under this apartheid system. There's hope from the growth of the Joint List and the international solidarity movements to end the apartheid system, but there's much work to be done. Folks, be real about that issue. Does anybody else have anything you want to offer?
It's been very encouraging to see the growth, obviously, of the Joint List, and specifically the more left socialist aspect of that movement through Hadash. And it's obviously very unclear what's going to happen over the next few weeks. Israeli politics is certainly in crisis, but you hope out of crisis comes some kind of opportunity for an end to this. Though it's very frightening when you see the two main oppositions being very similar in their treatment of Palestinians.
Absolutely.
I hate to almost bring this up because it's Ben Rhodes, but Ben Rhodes tweeted out in the last couple of months that the rise of fascism worldwide isn't inevitable, and it is kind of encouraging to see all of these different places. They kind of with Brazil or Britain, also that they sort of get within the red zone, to use a football metaphor, but they can't punch it into the end zone at least. So
we'll see. Israel's a forerunner of this stuff, but definitely there's a lot. It's significant. And with the Joint List.
Just one quick point, just domestically for people who are listening in the United States and the UK, it's really important that we continue to put our pressure on this issue, as the United States plays a large role in Israel, and also in preventing people from being able to come to the United States or the UK. That comes from our government. That we really need to be pressuring the people in power who are trying to also maintain this system.
Absolutely. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.